But the realities of the world today is that it's much bigger than the transatlantic countries that you think that it is. Like, I don't know why this just came to my head right now, but maybe some of your viewers, maybe Jeff, maybe you'll think about this, right? You all remember the game Risk, right? Remember the old board game Risk, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, when you wanted to control North America, South America, Europe, whatever it was. And then there was always that one guy that just started building all of his little armies on Western and Eastern Australia, right? And, it was like, what the hell? Australia is all the way kind of like down here, right? And you go through turn after turn after turn after turn. And then suddenly you got like 30 armies in Western and Eastern Australia. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to do what is probably impossible in the world today. I'm going to conquer the world from Australia. And you just got to go from there. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's what India is doing, but what I am saying is that this whole West versus rest that you brought up, I absolutely agree with you. The rest, this colloquial rest, is now able to stand up on its own.
Welcome, everyone. It's Jeff from the Burning Archive, and I've got a very special guest today. It is Michael Rossi from Michael Rossi Poli-Sci YouTube channel, but more importantly, from Rutgers University.
Yes, Rutgers for more than 25 years, from grad school to UNMA programs. So they, what can I say? It's my academic home base.
Yeah. We're going to have a discussion today about the Alaska Summit and Russia-US relationships, but not the usual who won and what the photo ops meant and all that sort of stuff, but maybe a deeper look at the conflict resolution, but also have a look at some of the key, like the upcoming Shanghai Cooperation Organisation meeting and like the India-China relationship, some of these broader things. And you've actually just come back to America from that region. You were teaching at Tashkent University. Maybe we could just start there. If you just give us a little bit of background of your move back to the US and what you've noticed about the region and how what you're going to be teaching back in America sort of fits into this discussion of what happened exactly at Alaska.
Well, first of all, Jeff, I'm glad to be back here. Thank you for having me back again. I think this is our second time that we have spoken. And first time was at Webster University, not Tashkent University, but Webster University is an American university based out of St. Louis. And they have a number of overseas campuses in Geneva, Switzerland, Vienna, Athens, Leiden, Netherlands, Tashkent, Uzbekistan is actually one of their largest and most successful campuses. So it's an all-English university, American accredited. And so you would think that with Webster being the largest within the overseas campuses, that the United States has sort of, set its feet within Central Asia. And one thing that I've noticed over the nearly 4 years that I've been working there, and it was just phenomenal time. I have nothing but positive things to say about the university. My students, I love dearly. But the United States was, when I got there, and remains even now, cosmetic. It's very cosmetic in Central Asia. Even more cosmetic than the European Union, which has a growing presence. It has a growing economic, cultural, social, educational presence within Central Asia. America is, as I like to frequently say, sort of a Johnny-come-lately to the region. And while there is a growing number of students throughout the region, Tashkent especially, who are learning English, they're not learning English instead of Russian, but they're learning English alongside of Russian, right? So Russian is still the primary language within the region. And, it's not an official, observation, but it's apparent. all of the jobs, all of the best paying jobs, the high end jobs in Tashkent, in Almaty, Samarkand, Dushanbe, Bishkek, all require one to be fluent in Russian, along with the native language. English is even a bigger bonus. But if you don't speak Russian, good luck. So in that sense, right? I think that the Russian Soviet legacy, right, within Central Asia is still very much alive and well. And I wouldn't even say it's a legacy. I would just say it's a living tradition. My students will speak Russian by default in the hallways to one another. It's sort of seen as a status symbol as well, right? Because Russian is still seen as the lingua franca of the region. And people don't see speaking Russian as anything particularly Russian or culturally Russian, right? In the same way that you and I are speaking English to one another, we're not doing this in conscious deference to the British, in that regard, right? It's just
quite the contrary.
Right, exactly. Take a look at my last name. It's clearly not Anglo-Saxon here. But so in that regard, to connect this to, I guess, the wider geopolitical, events that are happening. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are now officially partner members of BRICS. Right? They're not formal members, but they are partner members, which is sort of seen as this, tiered, gradual evolution to becoming a member of BRICS. And interestingly enough, the whole BRICS partner concept was done in a way to bring Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan into the fold. There's also sort of a general understanding within Central Asia that, where Kazakhstan goes, Uzbekistan is going to follow within the next 5-10 minutes. If some viewers might know that funny internet meme with Mr. Bean, who's kind of looking to, at the other classmate and then suddenly looking up when someone sees them or whatever. I mean, that's sort of the running joke, right? Kazakhstan is kind of the trendsetter. Uzbekistan follows very closely behind. All respect to Uzbekistan, the country that I had, lived in. But knowing that Kazakhstan and both are BRICS partner members, right, sort of implies that not just Russia, but Russia, China, and India have really solidified a highly successful and growing transnational economic agreement. And so with Shanghai Cooperation or BRICS or the One Belt, One Road, which is really China's pet project within SCO, it's very hard. It is very hard to take seriously this idea that Russia is isolated economically, politically, diplomatically. What is equally interesting is that Vladimir Putin, met with Trump last week as just simply a matter of schedule. This was not some attempt at breaking out of isolation as some Western media want you to believe. Russia has not been isolated, maybe isolated from the EU, which sanctioned Russia. But other than that, we see Russia, as being one of the primary countries pushing for this idea of a multipolar, multilateral world post 2025, for sure.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, culture and ideas really shape how, I guess, geopolitics, in the usual term, gets done. And very much in the Western tradition, the sort of Mackinder ideas of, controlling the world island are still, dominant in both, I guess, mainstream and critical of mainstream sort of imagination, so to speak. But it really imagines Eurasia and Central Asia as just this kind of empty space that is going to be controlled from the outside, whereas what you're describing is a very dynamic, changeable, region or continent with quite other dynamics as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that once again, Kazakhstan is at the forefront of this. The current president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who has been in power, if I'm not mistaken, since I'm blanking. I wish that I had. I'm going to just ballpark around 2016. I think it's
Yeah.
2016. He's been
Yeah.
around for about 10 years or so, and he kind of coined this model called multi-vector diplomacy, multi-vector foreign policy, which is taken from the larger playbook of earlier post-Soviet sovereign democratic ideas. Putin is one of the biggest proponents of this whole notion of sovereign democracy. But interestingly enough, Tokayev's predecessor, Nursultan Nazarbayev, the longtime president of Kazakhstan, still alive, still around today, living in retirement, was one of the real pioneers in this. What exactly is multi-vector foreign policy? And that is, it's a very simple thing. And that is our country, whether it's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, most of the Stan countries apply this. We will work with anybody that wants to work with us, right? We will not turn away any country because of ideology, because of another country pressuring us not to deal with them. So if Tokayev or the current president of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, hosts Vladimir Putin or Sergei Lavrov one day, Chinese Premier Xi Jinping another day, Narendra Modi comes a third day. If Donald Trump wants to come to Central Asia, they will not turn him away. They will not say no. But the understanding is that we will work with everyone on our terms. And we will work with them in what is beneficial to our national interests. And despite the narrative that is predominantly still in the West, Russia has been quite willing to accommodate this, right? Russia is perfectly fine with this, right? So long as a couple of pre-existing conditions are still around, right? The Russian language is still widely used. The Russian population is still, permitted to speak their language, do their culture, have their Central Asian countries are like the Russian population. They're fine. Let them do their thing, right? This is not a Ukraine situation. This is not a Baltic country situation where it's somehow almost taboo to be Russian, right? No, everybody is fine with that. But in that, right? Central Asian countries are equally eager to work with China, with India, with Turkey, with Iran at this point as well. And, with the exception of Turkey right now, these are all primary BRICS members. So this, as far as Russia is concerned, is perfectly fine. China has little to no problem with this. And I guess what this all means is that, Western countries, let's say the United States in particular, less so the European Union, but, the United States in particular oftentimes engages countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and others with some kind of stipulations like you need to improve your human rights, minority rights, democracy, da-da-da-da-da-da. Let's be perfectly honest here, right? Central Asian countries are far more, let's say, autocratic than democratic. But with the exception of Turkmenistan and, of course, Afghanistan, but we're not including them within the post-Soviet regions. I mean, these countries, the autocracy in these countries are more like, the Chinese corporatist model. In which I've lived in Uzbekistan for 4 years. I never had a single issue, a single problem. Day-to-day lives, especially among ordinary people in Tashkent, Samarkand in Kazakhstan, even more so, Almaty, Dushanbe in Tajikistan, Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. I've been, all over. I mean, you could be forgiven for thinking that this was a regular Western modernizing country in that sense, right? So, it's just this understanding where it's like, economic freedoms are allowed. Individual freedoms are basically warranted to a certain degree, but just don't question the current power structure, and everything will be fine. So it's not a surprise that these countries work with Russia and China and India, because it's purely economic. It's purely business, right? We're not talking about changing the ideology around. And any attempts at trying to introduce Western liberal democracy from the outside, I think, is going to, largely backfire. And that's not to say, let me just qualify this, that's not to say that there is no culture of democracy, right? That there's no, behavioral or attitudinal sense of social justice, of social welfare. There very much is. Among the ordinary people, there is very much a sense of, let's say, community interdependence. I don't know if you can call that liberal democracy, but for the time being, things work. Can they be better? Of course they can be. But are they as stereotypically bad as many people would associate a country that ends in the suffix "stan"? No, all right, absolutely not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I guess India, China in recent years, Russia in its own way, and I guess you're also describing this as well within the other Central Asian states, have articulated their own, I guess, traditions, or cultural traditions, political traditions, and institutions of democracy, independent of, I guess, the Western story of the emergence of liberal democracy. And it's also making me think of an interview I did with the historian Marie Favreau about a book she wrote called The Horde, How the Mongols Changed the World, which I don't know if you know that, but it totally, it will totally transform your understanding of the Mongol Empire, the marauding horde, who were actually, I mean, they were quite skilled diplomats and governors that actually had their own kind of, not democratic, but conciliar kind of traditions of statecraft as well. So anyhow, but that's a little bit of a digression. But that is talking about, I guess, different ways of managing or resolving conflict between state or within states, but also between states as well. And that's kind of a bit of a focus of some of your academic work that seems quite relevant to, a different reading of what happened at Alaska. Do you want to just briefly mention some of your thinking on the conflict resolution issue?
Yeah, because I think
how conflicts get resolved between states.
One thing, just sort of a shameless plug, is that I'm going to be offering my course on conflict resolution to students at Fordham University this semester, again, for the third time. It's one of my favorite classes to teach, and every time that I am invited back to Fordham, it's just an amazing experience. I mean, so it's a stellar university. Some of the students are some of the best that I, have ever worked with. In a way, you're right. The idea of conflict resolution is, the reality is that it's a long, drawn-out process, and it is something in which you can't expect one meeting, one summit, one handshake to solve. So in any event, the Alaska summit, the Anchorage meeting between Trump and Putin, if nothing else, started the dialogue and created at least an atmosphere in which both countries seem to find more in common than they find differences, right? And the understanding is that as long as both countries and both leaders are interested in continuing dialogue and continuing the conversation, then the opportunity for reaching a negotiated solution is much more likely to happen, right? And so I think that many people today are assuming that all that needs to happen is Trump gets Putin on board, then Trump tells the EU what's going to happen. We get Putin, Zelensky, Trump into a room. We sign some documents, and everything is fine. That does not happen. Okay, that does not happen. Some are surprised that Zelensky is still rejecting some of the peace proposals. This is normal, right? This is to be expected. If Zelensky all of a sudden accepted all of the proposals, it meant that somebody is putting a proverbial gun to the back of his head saying, sign this document, right? This is an offer that you literally cannot refuse. But what can also happen, right? What can also very much happen is that talks break down, in that Zelensky rejects the proposals that are largely in agreement between the United States and Russia. And he feels that he could do this if he gets some guarantees from the European Union. As a side note, and this is a bit more my own opinion than a little bit more professional, I don't really see what Europe, what the EU, what NATO minus the United States can truly offer Ukraine. They say a lot, but they don't have the financial leverage, they don't have the military leverage, and they certainly do not have the leadership. They don't have the leadership. If you can point to me somebody within Europe right now, either at the national or at the EU level, that stands at the same level as Putin, as Xi Jinping, even as Donald Trump, okay, I would love to hear it, because the only one that I could honestly think that could remotely come close is Emmanuel Macron, but I don't see that happening at all. By the way, did you happen to notice one of those, that one iconic photo of all of the leaders of Europe as well as the EU literally sitting in the waiting room like a doctor's office, waiting to be called in? That already tells you what Trump thinks, right, of these individuals. And look, say what you want about Trump. Some people think he's, a trailblazer. Others think that he is America's mad king. Sure, every civilization gets a mad king, a deranged emperor every so often. But you know what? We remember them because they still do things. And I guess in Trump's case, right now, he is having the time of his life, enjoying the spotlight, being able to sit down with Putin, with Lavrov, with Belousov, and with the high-ranking members of the Russian, government, and coming to an agreement where, if nothing else, they are willing to continue dialogue. That in of itself tells you something. So, to go back to this whole idea of conflict resolution being a long, drawn-out process, the ultimate goal of conflict resolution is to keep all parties at the table, keep them talking. And sometimes you can go for days, for weeks, without coming to any kind of agreement. But as long as they don't leave the table, this is one of the things that I teach in my class. As long as they don't leave the table, as long as they are willing to get up the next morning and go to the next round of talks, you still have a chance, right? You still have a chance to come to some kind of an agreement. And if there is a negotiated agreement, it's going to simultaneously please everybody and disappoint everyone, right, at the same time. What we can probably surmise, given where all parties are diplomatically as well as on the battlefield, is that we can basically come up with two things. Number one, Ukraine will have to give up any chances of getting into NATO. Interestingly enough, this is probably the easiest thing for Ukraine to do, for the one very simple reason that even if they applied for NATO membership now, they would not be able to get in. America would veto it. Hungary, Slovakia would veto it. These are the three big ones. We don't know what France or Germany would do. Poland probably would vote yes. The Baltics would vote yes, but we have to stop listening to the Baltics because they're small. They're whatever. Finland, Sweden, whatever. Okay. But as long you have to get in by unanimous votes. And right now, at the absolute least, we can know that the Hungarians and the Slovaks will vote no. And the second thing that will most likely happen is that Ukraine has to give up Crimea, which has been out of Ukraine's hands for more than 10 years. And as I have said on other podcasts, I've spoken extensively with James Kerlinzy, with Piotr Kurzin. I've had talks with Pascal Lotaz, with Glenn Deason, all wonderful, wonderful people here. The very countries that are vociferously defending Ukraine's territorial integrity, including Crimea, have embassies, not consulates, in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. So if we're going to be talking about keeping territorial integrity sacrosanct, that argument was thrown out the window more than 15 years ago with Kosovo. Yeah. And I know that the West loves to poo-poo this by saying, well, Kosovo's a special case. No, it's not. It's not a special case. You call it a special case because you want to make it a special case. But Russia, Putin, Lavrov, they have looked at Kosovo and they have said, well, if you can do this, then so can we. And I want to just state for the record here, right? I mean, I do not believe that, Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence is legal, but it's a fait accompli. I mean, it's just sort of, it is. So if we have already agreed to redraw borders of a country, and this is where things become incredibly problematic. If we do it for Ukraine, Kosovo might have been the one forgetful thing. Ukraine is going to go directly into the records. And that is going to then give a potential green flag to a number of other would-be separatist areas. But I'm sorry, we have already crossed that line in 2008 when it came to Kosovo.
Yeah. And look, South Sudan formed as a separate country. I think it was within the last 10 years. And
can I bring up South Sudan? Because I'll tell you what, why is South Sudan in the UN and not Kosovo, right? Why is that? Because South Sudan organized a referendum, or at least there was a referendum within, at that point, the entirety of Sudan that legitimized, right, acknowledged a referendum on independence. And if the South Sudanese voted for independence, the government in Khartoum would recognize it, which is what happened. So in addition to conflict resolution, I've looked extensively at this idea of breakaway territories, or what I would call parastates. And if your viewers are interested, I can, send you links to some articles that I've written. And I promise you that the articles are interesting to read. They're not jargonistic and any of that kind of stuff, right? In any event, the government in Khartoum recognized the referendum. So the basic understanding is that if the host country recognizes the separatism, recognizes the breaking away of the territory, then there's very little by way of opposition in the UN. So if Khartoum recognizes South Sudan breaking away, if Belgrade, Serbia, recognizes the referendum in Montenegro in 2006, then there's little reason for anybody to oppose this. So these entities go to the UN, they apply for membership, they pass through the Security Council, because the Security Council, will Serbia oppose the No. Is Sudan opposed to South? No. Okay, there it is. There it is. There it is. But if there is opposition within the host country for unilateral secession of territory, like Serbia has for Kosovo, surprise, surprise, Kosovo's not in the UN, right? The breakaway territories of Ukraine might be controlled by Russia, but Europe has said that as long as Ukraine does not recognize the loss of these territories, why should they? Very legal, very logical arguments. And even more so to the point, when Serbia took Kosovo to the International Court of Justice in 2010 to contest the legality of its declaration of independence. And here is where things get very, very muddy, because Serbia's question to the ICJ was Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence legal or not, right? Yes or no. They were hoping that the ruling would say that the secession was illegal because the host state does not recognize. The ICJ's decision, it was not a ruling, it was a decision, right? And there's a difference between that because it was sort of a non-binding decision. The ICJ's decision ultimately came down to two things. Number one, Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence was not illegal. Not illegal. That does not mean legal. It just says not illegal for one very simple reason. There's nothing on the books that prohibits a territory from declaring independence. Now, this gave the Albanians in Kosovo all the reason that they wanted to believe that they were in the right. And they started, dancing out of the courtroom and celebrating. The judges were like, wait, I'm not done yet. Hang on a second. Hang on a second. And the second ruling was, because there is nothing on the books prohibiting declaring independence, there is nothing, this is important, there is nothing requiring states today to recognize the legality of that declaration. Now, if you want to, it's out of our control. But if you don't want to, you are not obligated to do so. And so the ICJ ruling on Kosovo did not create this major watershed of countries that were withholding recognition to all of a sudden do it. Spain has not changed its mind. Neither has Slovakia, Cyprus, Greece, or Romania. 5 countries in the EU and in NATO that are keeping Kosovo from entering both of these organizations. Has not changed the mind of Russia or China, which keeps them in the Security Council from preventing Kosovo from entering the UN. Kosovo is a frozen conflict, and it will remain a frozen conflict for the indefinite future. But why is this important to our conversation about Ukraine today? Because as far as Russia is concerned, the population of at least Crimea and the other 4 oblasts all voted in a referendum to secede. Now, you can argue whether this is a legitimate referendum or not, but Russia claims this to be a legal justification for them breaking away and then for them deciding that they want to join Russia. They're not really all that interested in getting the rest of the world to recognize. In many cases, what Russia wants in some kind of peace agreement is either for Trump to push the idea that these areas are now part of Russian territory, for Ukraine to just write the territory off. And as soon as Ukraine signs off on that, then it's all, then it's all legal. But if the EU is stressing that Ukraine's territory cannot be contested and that we cannot change borders, fantastic. Then downgrade your embassies in Pristina to a consulate and make Serbia very happy, right?
This is speculative on my part, but it does seem to me that, there's a dilemma about how to resolve the political constitution of whatever a post-conflict Ukraine state is. So there's the 4 oblasts in Crimea, etc. But more urgently, I guess, at the moment, Ukraine's a martial law government. It's a martial law government that's about to be defeated, or has been defeated, but whose defeat is about to be more or less explicitly admitted. And where many Ukrainian critics of the government say it's an open air prison with bussification, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So the implications of an explicit admission of defeat, or at least withdrawal from the conflict, potentially catastrophic for the political authority of the Ukrainian state. And, there's already been 7 million people fled the country. It could a few more million may well leave post-conflict. There's a huge challenge of reconstruction and reconciliation.
Yep.
And I could easily, I've speculated that, ultimately Russia can't just solve this conflict on the battlefield, as some people claim, because it actually has to deal with the reconstitution of the Ukrainian state. So, I could even anticipate, or imagine rather, I guess, a kind of a process of referenda for, other parts of Ukraine, other than the I guess the 5 regions that are now constitutionally part of Russia.
Sure.
That go through a similar process. Do you want to be part of Russia? Do you want to be, part of Ukraine A, Ukraine B, something like that? Which is probably a big ask. But I guess it goes really to this question of, there's more involved in this political process of conflict resolution than just security agreements and who's winning on the battlefield.
Sure.
How do you see some of those deeper conflicts getting resolved within the process that has really only pretty fragilely begun, I guess, after Alaska?
We could have a whole hour just talking about this one question, because what this ultimate, and I'm trying to go for the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is that Ukraine's fate is going to determine geopolitics for the rest of the century. The post-war 1945 arrangement is over. It's done. And one of the biggest wrenches thrown in the cog in this arrangement is Russia's decision to annex territory, and not just simply occupy the territory, in which case it would force a change of government in Kiev and then hand the territory back. We are talking about another country invading another country and claiming it for its own. This has not happened since the Second World War. So the symbolism, of course, is creating more than red flags in the West. It's creating those nuclear sirens that I think both you and I remember growing up when we went through those nuclear bomb drills or whatever. But to the point here is the issue about Ukraine's territory and Ukraine's sovereign authority was already put in question as early as 2014, 2015. And we're not talking about Crimea. We're talking about the Minsk Accords that at the time, Russia had every intention of recognizing Donbass as part of a future Ukrainian state, but under special kinds of autonomous self-rule. This was the idea. Right? This was the whole thing, right? In which Donetsk and Lugansk would be given a kind of regional autonomy that would operate within the constitutional framework of the Ukrainian state, but would have the independence to engage in joint economic cooperatives with Russia. And the pressure from Ukrainian hardliners on whoever was in power, whether it was Zelensky from 2019 or Petro Poroshenko beforehand, was that if you sign this away, you are effectively signing your own political death warrant. Hardliners are basically saying no concessions to separatists, but more to the point, if Kiev was to sign this agreement, what is to say that this would not create Me Too movements in other areas of Ukraine, right? Zakarpattia, the Transcarpathian region in Western Ukraine, which whenever it comes up in the news is always seen as, there's Hungarians that live there. There's more than Hungarians. there is a group of people called Rusins that live there. I actually happen to be half Rusin. My mother's side of the family
Oh,
is
really? Okay.
from
Yep.
Zakarpattia, right?
Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
so this is where I'm Orthodox, right? It's from my mother's side of the family. And the Rusin culture is not Ukrainian, not Russian, not Polish, not Slovak. It's one of those like, pre-modern identities that was able to somehow hold on to a language and a distinct culture. This area was part of Czechoslovakia prior to the outbreak of the Second World War, and that area was given to the Soviet Union, which underwent a severe case of Ukrainianization in that sense. So my point is this, is that if autonomy would have been given to the Donbas region, there were enough within the Hungarian and the Rusin communities, both there as well as the diaspora, to push for similar elements. And Ukraine would have risked being devolved into a little more than a confederation of various regions. This is ultimately the whole thing. The Bosnianification of the country. But okay, so that's over and done with because the war started. Here we are now, 2015. Russia is not Minsk Accords are largely over and done with. They're dead. What would we see if we were to actually reach a post-conflict Ukraine? There is going to most likely be some loss of territory. I mean, that much is certain. And whether Ukraine is forced to recognize that or not is inconsequential because, Russia enjoys de facto control over these regions. And we can for sure, right, say that this will be the Crimea and specifically the Donbas region. I would say even more likely, if there is some kind of an agreement, we will come to a ceasefire, a peace agreement at the fault lines, at the battle lines, which is why Bosnia looks the way that it does effectively today, because it is stay where you are, largely where you are with that. But then what will happen to, let's say, the rest of Ukraine? What is the reconstruction going to look like? We have already noticed that reconstruction plans, especially coming from the United States, are coming in the form of, you don't need to pay us, just give us access to your resources, which means that Ukraine would be signing over its own sovereignty to not just the US government, but that's not how we work, but to private firms who would have direct access to Ukraine's raw materials, its natural resources. In this sense, I remember when the war started back in 2021. I was in Tashkent for about a month, and my colleagues and some of my students were looking at me and they were asking, "So, what do you think is going to happen?" And my first reaction was, "No matter what happens, Ukraine is screwed. Ukraine is screwed because they will have to either deal with whatever Russia demands or pay the bill to the West for bailing them out." What kind of a future is that? You mentioned that there's like 7 million people that have already left Ukraine. The population of Ukraine has halved. They were closing in on 40 million in the early 90s. They're around 20 today. I mean,
there hasn't been a census for
no.
A long
I
time.
mean,
So even that number is
knell.
pretty.
You're right. It's a death knell. And how many of those Ukrainians that fled to Europe when Europe opened its borders, how many of them are going to come back? How many of them want to come back? They don't. As far as they're concerned, there's nothing to go back to. I mean, I absolutely sympathize with the Ukrainian state because it's broken. It is a broken state. And if you take a look at the post-Yugoslav space, and here we are 30 years after the Dayton Accords, there is still legacies from the 1990s. And those wars were brutal, but they were short. What's happening in Ukraine now? We're talking about at least 2 generations, at least 2, before we can see any kind of positive growth. I hope I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, have me on your show again. I have no problem just saying mea culpa, I was wrong.
Yeah, no,
and I take no pleasure. I take no comfort in saying any of this.
Yeah. I really do think the well, it's a social catastrophe, really, beyond anything else, and it will spill out in all sorts of ways. And I think, in a way, that's one of the deeper issues that actually makes Europe fundamentally relevant to the, the post-conflict resolution of the matter. Both, I mean, because the EU cannot really bring that state into its sort of economic zone without dramatic consequences for the EU. But it also, it's a real estate issue. It's position. Ukraine is in Europe. It's not in the United States, and it's bearing a lot of the social issues. It'll be crossing borders, all that sort of stuff. So. I really don't know what the solution is, but I would only hope that at least if not at a political level, at an official level, there are people within the EU who are seriously thinking about how they're actually going to manage some of those sort of issues as well. Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. So, I mean, are you sort of optimistic or pessimistic about whether this sort of Ukraine peace process is on the right track, would you say, Michael?
Well, I would
just
say
as a
that,
sort of maybe before we pivot to SCO and that sort of thing. Or do you think it's sort of, I mean, because you commented on the photo with the EU leaders. I mean, my observation on that is how inept, as a diplomatic act, is it for the White House to stage and then publicise a photograph of that sort? Because that it's sort of like it's kindergarten diplomacy, or schoolyard bully diplomacy. Really,
Trump is notorious for doing this. I remember in his first term. He had attempted to come to a final agreement between Serbia and Kosovo, and he invited the Serbian president Aleksandar Vučić and they're still in power. Kosovo's president Albin Kurti, who is just I'm sorry to say, he's just a relic of the 90s. He's some pan-Albanian nationalist that is the biggest instigator in all of these issues. But okay, whatever it is. And he has them sit in front of his big desk like school children. It's interesting how he will give deference to those that he wants to give deference to and make it painfully obvious that there are people that are beneath him on this. And, as somebody who within the IR field, the international relations field, right? I mean, what school of philosophy do you ascribe to? I mean, I'm a constructivist. I'm largely a constructivist. I agree with the writings of Alexander Wendt and Ted Hopf. I also ascribe to world systems theory by Emanuel Wallerstein. So it's sort of like a realist, but much more pessimistic, in that sense. Am I optimistic? I'm guardedly optimistic for one very simple reason. And that is Moscow has been successful in gaining the ear of Washington. And as far as Moscow is concerned, that is the only ear worth gaining. That is the only ear worth gaining. Putin has said multiple times that the world is multipolar, and the United States is and will remain a primary player within that multipolar world. The United States still is the first power. China is number 2. Russia is number 3. This is Putin. This is not me. This is literally Putin, the guy who everybody thinks is like the guy that's going to take over Europe. He's basically saying, look, at the absolute best, Russia is number 3 in the world. So whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever is in the White House, Moscow will reach out and answer that call. And so in that sense, Trump is little bit more than 6 months into his term. And I know that for some people that it seems like it's been 6 years, but he's only 6 months, which means that he's got another 3.5 years left. In that regard, Moscow has time. Moscow has time. And as long as they maintain that open dialogue, whether it's between Putin and Trump, Lavrov and Rubio, whoever it happens to be, Europe can hem and haw, and they can say whatever they want. But at the end of the day, and I also have to say this, not subjectively, but just observationally, Europe looked like they were the kids coming to the follow-up meeting. I almost wondered why they felt the need to come. Trump could have simply emailed them. This was one of those times, and I'm sure that all of us and your viewers are like, we had to come into a meeting at some point at work, and someone's like, well, this could have been handled through an email. This could have been handled through a Zoom call. But they all came. Notice who was not there. You know who was not there? Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign minister. She's the only person in the EU that I think makes Ursula von der Leyen look a little bit more professional. I mean, I'm sorry, but I mean, all of them are amateurs at this stage when it comes to it. So, am I optimistic? Optimistic in the sense that we might be reaching one step closer towards an agreement. But please understand that reaching an agreement is not going to happen in the next months, maybe not even the next year or so. If I'm wrong, great. But I've come to realize that protracted social conflicts, and this is a term that was enumerated in one of the classic works on conflict resolution by Edward Azar, whose book is called Protracted Social Conflict, argues that in order to reach resolution, not management, there's a difference between conflict resolution and conflict management. And the way that I like to describe it to my students is that the parent could be the father, could be the mother, but most likely the mother. The mother comes home and the two kids are fighting, right? This is not going to work if there's only one kid, right? Could, brother, sister, whatever happens to be, right? The kids are fighting and the mother is she's had a long day. She's tired. She doesn't want to deal with the stuff. She says to one, you go to your room. She says to the other one, you go to your room. At that moment, mom is not interested in justice. Mom wants quiet. That's conflict management. That is step one. But the thing is that management does not reach resolution. You can be sent to your room. You're not going to all of a sudden think better of what you did. You're going to sit there and stew, and you're going to be angry, and you're going to think about how you were unjustifiably wronged and stuff. So, but does mom stop the fighting? Yes. Does mom stop the war? Yes. That's step one. If we can reach a cessation of actual killing, that's step one. But what do we need to do in order to stop the fighting, stop the war? What do we need to do in order to ensure that Ukraine does not lose any more territory? That's the kicker. And if Russia agrees to whatever is on the table, then we've got something. But if Europe is going to insist, no, we need, boots on the ground, we need NATO membership, we need, we're all talking about security guarantees for Ukraine. Russia's talking about it. America's talking about it. The EU is talking about it. What do we define it as? Just recently, within the last 24 hours, Jeff, Lavrov brought up the idea that if we're going to talk about security guarantees, China needs to be involved in this as well. Not just the EU, not just NATO. If we're going to talk about security guarantees, this needs to be an international thing. What will Ukraine agree to? What will the EU agree to? And will the United States basically tell the EU or the rest of NATO, guys, take it or leave it? Because Trump could easily walk away from this saying, he could wash his hands like Pontius Pilate and say, out of my hands. It's your problem now.
I have thought from the start of this Ukraine conflict that it would be a delicious historical irony to see Indian and Chinese peacekeeping forces to, keeping the former colonial empires in Europe apart from conflict. But yes, it's quite interesting. Interesting in terms of your observation about difference between conflict resolution and conflict management, because just pivoting to sort of India, China, and the SCO, just today, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and the Indian National Security Advisor Avit Doval have met to discuss the border issue between China and India, which has been in the mode of conflict management since 2020, arguably since 1962. There's a lot of talk about, some sort of a significant improvement in the relationship, a reset of the relationship, a rapprochement of some kind, including a meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the SCO in a week or two. What's your read of what's going on there between India and China and its relationship, I guess, their close mutual partners, Russia, and the broader Central Asia, Shanghai Cooperation, Eurasian Security environment?
They're all members of SCO. They are primary members of BRICS. They are all part of the collective One Belt, One Road initiative. So it makes sense, right? It absolutely is logical, and it makes sense for India and China to reach a rapprochement. I think that this was accelerated within the last couple of weeks when Trump was threatening to initiate first a 25 and then a 50% tariff, on Indian goods, which was all of these tariffs backfire. It's another thing within my conflict resolution class. I have a dedicated section where we talk about sanctions, with the question of, do sanctions work? And spoiler alert, no, they don't. People will find ways, around them. Why do we continue to issue sanctions? Because it's all that we've got right now. But it's interesting in the idea that the United States was threatening major tariffs against India for continuing to buy oil from Russia. Mind you, this is the same country and this is the same president that just shook Putin's hand and sees him as like an equal. You could almost tell. I mean, there are very few people in this world that Trump openly respects and admires. Putin is definitely one of them. So you have to kind of wonder, what is the rhetoric? Is it all talk? Is it no action? But what it did do was get India to double down, just like Brazil. Brazil was, sanctions, tariffs, okay, whatever. This is not how the world works anymore. This is largely the decision of Brazil's current president, Lula da Silva. So the idea that India and China are getting closer together, in the same way that, America's efforts at trying to wedge Russia and China apart from one another brings them closer together, tells you everything that you need to know about the emerging multipolar world. And this very easy to observe fact that Western attempts at sanctioning, embargoing, economically isolating do little to nothing. All it really does is it prevents Russian, Chinese, Indian, whatever goods from entering into the Eurozone. Okay, fine. You don't want to buy Russian gas? You can buy it from third-party vendors, or you can buy American-produced LNG at a huge markup. I have many friends in Europe. I have many, many, many friends in Europe, colleagues and, just ordinary friends and whatever, that are telling us that the decisions made by the EU leaders are just disastrous. They're catastrophic. They're just absolutely catastrophic. Ursula's decision to agree to a 15% tariff with America selling its goods, wholesale, is just ridiculous. So, but anyway, to get back to this idea of SCO, India and China, the Trump's, in my opinion, this is my opinion, but Trump's attempt at tariffing India just simply accelerated what was going to happen anyway. Right? I honestly believe it was going to happen anyway, right? BRICS is expanding. It picked up its newest member earlier this year in January with Indonesia. And the word is still out whether or not BRICS is something to really take seriously or to, simply disregard. some of my colleagues that I regularly interact with on YouTube largely dismiss it. I say be very careful in your dismissal, because the more that you disregard, the more you'll be caught off guard when they overtake you, economically. So I'm not surprised, right? I'm absolutely not surprised by this. I also think that as BRICS is expanding, it's also consolidating. There's a big question as to whether or not BRICS should have a dedicated headquarters, whether there should be some kind of government, or and not a federal government, but some kind of legislative body. But in order for that to happen, the primary members have to sort out all of their open-ended differences. Because right now, BRICS is, nothing more than gentleman's agreement between one sovereign state and another. And BRICS, I believe, has 10 official members right now. Saudi Arabia would make the 11th, but they have yet to ratify that. But it's only a matter of time. We have a number of partner countries. It's going to become cumbersome. But you need the core members to tie up any and all loose ends. And let's be honest here. One of the reasons why American threats of economic isolation falls flat against Russia or India is because they have China to fall back on. And, you can say that we are entering a multipolar world. I would say that that multipolarism is going to be significantly asymmetrical, in which the United States still remains on top, but it's a declining power. My country is a declining power. I am living in late Rome, late Western Rome. Eastern Rome, we would have a lot of, civil wars. That would that'd be it. But China's a rising power, and it's a rising economic power, and it is one that cannot be taken lightly. So if the United States wants to, if Trump wants to ultimately tie up all things with Russia, with India, to then eventually go after China, because there's a lot of radio chatter that ultimately this is what Trump wants, is to take on an economic war with China. Good luck. Good luck. And I hope that when he does that, I'm once again living abroad. I'm once again living abroad, just so I don't have to worry about any of that.
Well, in a way, that's what he began really in April. I mean, Liberation Day or whatever it was in some sense a declaration of economic war against China, and he lost.
Okay, but let me just kind of unmask all of this. This Liberation Day about how Trump wants to make America economically self-sufficient, a manufacturing hub once again. You can't just say that, Like, I don't know how many of your viewers are fans of The Office, the American version of The Office. There's that great line where Michael Scott is sort of like, I declare bankruptcy. It's like, well, you can't just declare it and get it, Trump's whole idea of neoliberalism in one state prohibits him from doing this. We don't have a manufacturing sector that we outsource that in the 80s. Unless Americans want to absolutely fundamentally go back to our own version of American juche, American self-reliance, where we don't need the Chinese or the Russians or cheap labor for that matter. Great. But you can't just simply declare it. You need to build the factories here. And more to the point, you need to pay the workers a certain amount of livable wages. I mean, if you want to pay them Chinese slave labor wages, good luck, with, putting down the uprising. But this is one of the reasons why I can understand, I guess, the narrative and the symbolism of Trump. He is an he is a populist. He's a national populist. Like most right-wing populists, he gains a lot of interest. He's very charismatic. There's no question about that. But the worst thing that you could ever give a right-wing national populist is control of the state, because it's like a backseat driver. Okay, you want to drive the car? Here you go. Now let's see what you can do. And
Yeah.
suddenly you begin to realize you don't have the economic foundations because you outsource that at this
Yeah.
point.
It
So,
it, rem- it
yeah.
reminds me of a line from P.J. O'Rourke where he described as a conservative. Let's
Oh, yeah, PJ. Yeah, I know
translate
him.
this as
Yep.
a populist, as a person who believes government's incompetent and gets himself elected to prove it.
Yes. And that is what national populists end up doing. you know, and if you ever want to discredit the popularity of AfD in Germany, allow them to come to power.
Yeah, exactly. I guess we're saying that in a way, isn't it? But we drifted back to Trump, away from India and China, which in a way, I feel one of the ways in which with all the drama in the White House, etc., this tends to happen that there's so much momentum, and economic weight, cultural weight, political weight, etc., being distributed in other parts of the world, uh, and that is just this changing things dramatically. And I guess my observation on BRICS is particularly international relations, I think, as a legacy of Cold War, etc., has tended to view the world in a very dualistic sort of way, the
Yeah.
West versus the rest, all that sort of stuff. And both supporters and critics of BRICS are tending to, I guess, transfer that sort of block thinking, let's say, to BRICS, rather than just see it as another multilateral institution, amongst others, in a more broadly distributed power network, where it's not all about what BRICS does, it's what all the different states of BRICS do, which is sort of strengthened by the limited areas of cooperation within BRICS. But then that also enhances their bilateral relationships, their roles in the UN, their ability to negotiate with Europe and with the US, etc. And in a way that the India tariff, India Russia situation is almost symptomatic of that, because US threatened Russia, India maybe expected them to fold, but India said no. We've got friends, we've got neighbours who we can be better friends with.
Yeah.
And we'll take this as an opportunity to self-strengthen, strengthen the sort of Indian economy itself.
Yes.
We're confident in our own cultural, political power within the world as well.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's part of what's happened here as well. It's sort of the US is constantly underestimating its rivals in the world, and making, in a way, catastrophic misjudgments, because the tariff issue has gone down. I follow the Indian media reasonably closely, and it has gone down incredibly badly.
Yes, it has. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. This is another great observation. We can go for another, God knows how many, half hour, whatever it is on this. I'll try to be brief, but no, you're on the money, exactly on this. I absolutely agree with you. There's a couple of things to note here. Barring Trump, right? Forget Trump. Trump is just kind of the rude and crude, out loud part of what American foreign policy would do, no matter what. I've said a couple of times, my country, it's the only country that I have, but it's whatever. It's a declining imperial power, but it's still there. We're operating on legacy. Most of the people that run my country still desperately want to believe that it's 1996, because they're old enough to remember when they were at the zenith of their power in 1996. It doesn't happen anymore. It's done. It's gone. Trump is unique in that he can get small states to cater, to cave. He can bend the EU to do what he wants. He can get Mark Rutte to call him daddy. He can get Ursula to completely kowtow to him, and that gives him what he wants. Russia does not kowtow. China does not kowtow. India does not kowtow. And this has nothing to do with India suddenly deciding to stand up against Trump. India has been quietly, methodically, and very visibly, if you have been noticing it, emerging as a major global power since the early 2000s. And they have reached a point now where they can cash in on all of their efforts to tell the United States, whether it's Trump or anybody else, okay, whatever, we don't care. Because we have other countries. We have Russia. We have China. We have, you know what? Even when we're fighting them, we have Pakistan. We have Indonesia. We have Africa. Right? And tariffs, people tend to forget. What do tariffs do? Do they hurt the actual? No. You know what they do? They hurt the consumer at home. That's what they do. Doesn't matter. A tariff is basically taxing the locals. So how does it affect the country overseas? But this is also indicative of the realities of a new multipolar world, in that the United States, as a post-unipolar power, and at the risk of sounding like the academic nerd right now, if your viewers are interested in any of this, Christopher Lane, Layne, does some phenomenal work on the idea of unipolarism as a theory and as America as a case study of unipolarism, right? I defer to Christopher Lane almost always in this. And he argues, and I agree with him 100%, unipolar powers are on borrowed time and they sow the seeds of their own demise for two reasons. One, if they become belligerent, other powers will end up balancing against them. Even if they are benign, if they are inclusive, as the United States was nominally in the 1990s, they will enrich and empower other countries. But to a point where at some point, those other countries will reach a critical tipping point where they have to decide, do we want to remain a supplicant of the larger power, or do we want to break away from the band and go solo, right? And that is kind of where India had gone, right? India has played this very gradual emerging role onto the global scene quite successfully since Nehru. They were an isolationist country up until the 1990s. No one gave any thought to the Indian economy. And then during the age of global, the golden age of globalization from roughly 1995 to about 2008, right? The Indian economy absolutely capitalized, right, on this, to the point where now, instead of India's best and brightest leaving the country and coming to the United States, many are either staying in India or a lot are going back to India for that regard. So for the United States to effectively economically try to threaten a country like India, once again, lots of luck. It's just not going to happen. The world is different. But I also want to point out that it is, I believe it was Modi who said this at one point at a BRICS summit. BRICS is not anti-Western. It's not anti-American. It's just simply non-Western. It's non-American. Very much in what we were talking about earlier in multi-vector diplomacy. India is not going to completely cut all ties with the United States and just, go to the, polyamorous wedding with Russia and China. No, absolutely not. But if the United States wants to economically punk India at this point, India's response will say, okay, I guess. But the realities of the world today is that it's much bigger than the transatlantic countries that you think that it is. Like, I don't know why this just came to my head right now, but maybe some of your viewers, maybe Jeff, maybe you'll think about this, right? You all remember the game Risk, right? Remember the old board game Risk, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, when you wanted to control North America, South America, Europe, whatever it was. And then there was always that one guy that just started building all of his little armies on Western and Eastern Australia, right? And, it was like, what the hell? Australia is all the way kind of like down here, right? And you go through turn after turn after turn after turn. And then suddenly you got like 30 armies in Western and Eastern Australia. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to do what is probably impossible in the world today. I'm going to conquer the world from Australia. And you just kind of go from there. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's what India is doing, but what I am saying is that this whole West versus rest that you brought up, I absolutely agree with you. The rest, this colloquial rest, is now able to stand up on its own. And what it will do is, well, right now it's just simply resisting pressures from the neoliberal transatlantic West. Their foreign policy, at least as far as Russia, China is concerned, is still based on reacting to what comes out of the West. Do they have anything that is proactive? I'm not sure yet. Are they reactive? Yes. But you'd be surprised how much support you can get from being reactive, but only in so long as the West still remains the primary vocal global power.
Yeah, exactly. So very interesting times, aren't they? And it's a fundamentally changed dynamic. And I guess my only final observation, and this goes to your stuff about conflict resolution and the traditions and cultures of statecraft. I guess all the entire generation of Western American leaders have, in different variations, because America's a different case, I think, because it's so used to being absolutely dominant, have been acculturated to certain modes of statecraft.
Yeah.
And they are having to learn now how to adapt to a very different world where issuing ultimatums, staging stunts in the White House, negotiating security, guarantees, whatever, just don't necessarily work in the same way. And, maybe, my positive take on Alaska would be that it's a small step to adapting to that world and starting to learn a different manner of things.
If I can add one more element to this, and I'm going to kind of really just seep into poli-sci IR theory, and I've been in academia now for 25 years, is that what you just pointed out is the weaknesses and the limitations of the IR school of liberalism. And I mean liberalism in the IR field, not in the domestic field, right? So we're not talking about individual freedoms and elements like that, right? But there's genuinely, let's say, two theories within IR. You have realism, which is largely now dominated by the likes of John Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt. More traditionally, you have Ken Walt, you have Hans Morgenthau, you have the writings of Thucydides. I mean, this is more of a philosophy than anything else. But I'm sure that you and your viewers are familiar with Professor Mearsheimer. Liberalism is a philosophy that believes that there is an ideology, a very guiding, optimistic ideology that can prevent wars from happening and create permanent peace. This is something that is now largely dominated by the heads of state of the European Union. Every so often we get people in the United States like Barack Obama, perhaps, John F. Kennedy, among others. The problem with liberalism is that it's an ethos that justifies foreign policy for a country like the United States in moral, righteous terms, right? We defend Ukraine against the evils of Russia. We defend Ukrainian democracy. We defend Ukrainian freedoms. Forget the fact that domestic politics in Ukraine today has all but prohibited the use of the Russian language, the function of the Russian Orthodox Church. Forget the fact that this is more than just simply Ukraine, unfortunately, but many other countries that have simply decided to cancel certain cultures and identities. It's an us versus them mentality. I think that a way forward in all of this is, as I've already said, a third theory, and that is constructivism. And I want to just do some show and tell here for your viewers here, right? Social Theory of International Politics by Alexander Wendt. Not exactly a page turner, but it is one of the primary texts on constructivism, which argues constructivism is an IR theory that says that foreign policy, or the way that states look at the world, is through their own identities and their values. So why is it that the United States will bemoan human rights violations in, let's say, China and Russia, and when they need to, Saudi Arabia, but turn a blind eye and deaf ear to what is effectively state-sponsored genocide against the Palestinians? Why is it that the United States will look at someone like Vladimir Putin as an autocrat, but see Zelensky as a paragon of democratic virtue, despite the fact that he has suspended the electoral process in his country and not deferred to the Ukrainian parliament as the authoritative head of state? What this ultimately means is that many countries, if you feel that they are acting hypocritically, if you feel that they are double standards, it's because they are acting in double standards. They act one way towards some countries. They act much more belligerently and hostile towards others. And that's not to say that this exonerates a country like Russia, or it gets China off the hook, or it alleviates any of the internal problems that are happening in Iran, right? Far from it. But I guess the way to make sense of the world that we're living in right now is to look beyond the rhetoric and the talking and, the boilerplate talking points. And if many of your viewers, as I know many of my subscribers on my channel, believe that there is a huge degree of unfortunately, a huge degree of hypocrisy, of gaslighting coming from the very political leaders that claim to be the defenders of human rights, universal laws, and democratic values. This is the world that we're unfortunately living in at this point. I find myself, as I said, more of a constructivist than a realist, just simply because I think that Mearsheimer's arguments, Waltz's arguments, only take you so far. But I also believe that at the end of the day, these countries are going to still defer to national interest. And because liberalism has said, because European countries have put their reputations on the line and said, in so many words, Russia bad, Ukraine good, NATO a force for defense. If we fail at Ukraine, then come the Baltics, then come Poland, then come this, then come that, which is interesting coming from the same group of people that want you to believe that Russians are absolutely incompetent, that their military is outdated. So you have to pick which Russophobic narrative that you want. Are they the incompetent Mongolian barbaric horde that can't even take Odessa? Or are they the orcs that will basically take over all of Western civilization? You can't have both, folks. You ultimately can't have both. But what I see someone like Trump doing, and I want to go on record to say, right? And I know that I've been talking a little bit more than normal this time around, but I want to be very,
That's good.
I want to be very clear. I want to be very clear, right? I am no fan of Donald Trump. I am no fan of his domestic policies. I am no fan of his blanket coverage and defense of a state in the Middle East that is engaging in the worst forms of genocide right now since the Second World War. But I have to admit that for someone as egotistical, as narcissistic, as unpredictable, and yes, as kind of insane as he is controlling the discourse of geopolitics today. And all of the allegedly sane, responsible, sensible policymakers, academics, talking heads on TV, all they can do is react and respond. He met with Putin and Lavrov and Andrei Belosov, the Russian Minister of Defense, in Anchorage. They allegedly came to at least an agreement to continue to talk. That right there already puts the leverage in Russia's corner. And it affirms to me what I also thought many years ago as far as Ukraine. Ukraine is not only screwed, but it will eventually be thrown under the bus, as all countries except the UK and Israel, as far as the United States does. Ukraine will be sacrificed at some point. If nothing else, for the sake of consolidating and unifying NATO within the European continent, Ukraine will be the sacrificial lamb. And here we are right now. And it's not that this is anything surprising. You all remember a few months ago that very famous, infamous meeting between Zelensky and Trump and Vance in the Oval Office, where Zelensky was literally being thrown under the bus on live stream. Usually these things happen behind the scenes. But this is where we are. The United States is basically saying this is an investment that we're losing money on, and we can either profit by making a peace deal, or we can just simply wash our hands of it, give it to Europe, and let Russia and Brussels figure it out. But if your viewers are interested in trying to make sense of the world right now, I definitely, shameless plug, hit me up on my own channel. I'm more than happy to engage. But secondly, look up the theory of constructivism, because I think that this is a much more dynamic and realistic way of how states perceive themselves in the world and how they perceive other countries towards their own ideology.
It's a great tip, Michael, a great tip. And, I'm no theorist, but I am a historian, and in a way, like I've just been reading Christopher Clark's book on World War One, The Sleepwalkers, which in a way it's sort of like the demonstration empirically of many of the ideas that you've just been speaking of. Yes, and the Zelensky incident is famous. I feel maybe it's evidence of Donald Trump's skill development as president. That in February he kind of tried to destroy Zelensky on live stream, and perhaps now in August he's managing him with a sort of more humane, redundancy package, a little bit off screen. But anyhow, Michael, it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. So much rich material there, which I'm sure we can have many more conversations about. But I'll also include links to your YouTube channel and other stuff. And of course, you regularly appear on a few other channels as well. So I'm sure viewers will check you out there. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me again, Jeff. I think it was a great conversation, a little back, nice back and forth dialogue. I'm happy to be back. At some point, I'm going to get the wherewithal to start inviting people to my own channel. I'm just sort of an absent-minded professor at this point, whatever. But let's keep the conversation going, because this is just the beginning. It's just the beginning stage as far as Ukraine is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you once again.